What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another modern video, and today we're going to be taking a look at Golgari Yawgmoth piloted by Jesse Liu, who ended up taking it to a first place finish at the Apex Gaming Invitational, claiming the trophy and I believe an invite to the next Invitational for Season 3. Of course, before we get too deep into the deck, and you want to see more content like this, I post Pioneer stuff as well as just some other miscellaneous videos kind of related to the Pioneer modern format. If any of that stuff interests you, please go ahead and consider subscribing, ring the notification bell, so you know when I post new videos, when I go live and things like that. Also, if you go into the description of this video, there's two links. One of them goes to my Twitch channel if you want to see, get notifications when I go live, playing some different decks and modern more than likely, or just playing other kind of video games. If any of that interests you as well, go ahead and shoot me a follow over there. And there's a link in the description to my Discord server. You can go ahead and join over there and go ahead and send me some Magic questions. Really talk about anything related to the game. I just absolutely love Magic. It's obviously one of my favorite things. I based a whole YouTube channel around it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at Golgari Yawgmoth. Now, for people that have been around for a while, or people that know me, I have been playing Yawgmoth for a decent amount of time. I'd say I'm probably creeping up on a year. I've played the deck a lot. I have learned a lot from playing the deck. I've had some pretty good success, like playing the Golgari Yawgmoth deck. So it is definitely exciting for me to see this deck of a meta game that was like filled with Jeskai Breach, Murktide Regents, and things like that, and like a bunch of people that play like the 4 color and 5 color like Omnath like Elementals decks and stuff. I believe at least one or two of them made the top 8 as well of this event, along with like Grixis Shadow of all things. But getting too far ahead of myself here. Golgari Yawgmoth seeing it take down the tournament is awesome. Again, like being the person that like plays the deck, that's awesome. But then, just the fact that this deck I think is underrated a lot of the time, and it's kind of getting like the flowers it deserves, I feel. So for those not in the know of Golgari Yawgmoth, because again, it is in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small portion of the modern metagame compared to a lot of the other top decks that you would see, and a lot of the other decks by percentage that you would see over Golgari Yawgmoth. Essentially, the deck is based around Yawgmoth Thram Physician. Is a 4-mana 2/4 protection from humans, which is relevant a lot of the time, like more often than you would think. You can pay a life and sacrifice another creature to put a -1/-1 counter on up to one target creature and draw a card. It also has another ability that you can pay 2 black mana and discard a card to proliferate. So essentially, you're trying to pair Yawgmoth Thran Physician with Young Wolf and Strangleroot Geist. These cards have what's called Undying. So when a creature dies, if it has no minus or no +1/+1 counters on it, you return it to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter. If you have a Yawgmoth and say 2 Strangleroot Geist, and you have a Strangleroot Geist that has a +1/+1 counter on it, or there's different combinations of ways you can do, but essentially it will go infinite. So you sacrifice Strangleroot Geist, target nothing. You go ahead and draw a card. It'll come back with a +1/+1 counter because it did not have a +1/+1 counter on it when it died. You sacrifice the other Strangleroot Geist, target the Strangleroot Geist that had a +1/+1 counter on it to get rid of the +1/+1 counter. The other Strangleroot Geist comes back with a +1/+1 counter, and then the other Geist loses a +1/+1 counter. And the game doesn't know that this creature had already came back with a +1/+1 counter because it doesn't have a +1/+1 counter on it. So essentially, you can pass that +1/+1 counter between both creatures and draw cards equal to the number of cards, equal to your life total, essentially. -1 because you obviously don't want to lose your last life because you will lose the game. So knowing that you have like this essentially infinite combo where you can just draw a bunch of cards, right? Two things come into play. One, you need to have a way to win the game. So your ways of winning the game, or at least getting you to do some cool things. You have Blood Artist as at 1 copy. Whenever it or another creature dies, a target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So obviously you pay a life, sacrifice Strangleroot Geist, target a Strangleroot Geist, remove the counter. You deal a you your opponent loses a life, you gain a life. You gain that life back from sacrificing the creature, and while you're going through your loop, you're not netting any life, but your opponent is losing 1 life every time that happens. Which obviously getting to offset the cost of sacrificing creatures to make your opponent lose the game. You have Hapatra, who can essentially replace an Undying Threat because she makes a snake. So you can like sacrifice it, put a -1/-1 counter on something, make a snake. You can sacrifice the snake to put a -1/-1 counter on the Undying creature. There's a +1/+1 counter on it to make a snake, and then you can like sack the snake to something else to then make it. So like if your opponent just has like, a bunch of creatures, a Hapatra and a Yawgmoth, and a creature to like start it, you can just blow up your whole opponent's board by putting a bunch of -1/-1 counters on all their things. If you have an Undying creature, you can combo that way by just getting to sacrifice the snake instead of having an Undying creature. So it's an interesting way of doing it. This is definitely really good against like the fair decks because you just get to sacrifice the snake and just again shotgun their whole board. You get to keep all of essentially all of your creatures in play. And if you have like other ways of like getting to do it, like you have interesting ways of like using Yawgmoth's ability, like you just put -1/-1 counters on like 3, 4 creatures and then proliferate. You can just kind of like make some snakes that way and stuff. Just very interesting things you can do with Hepatra. And in this list, it is not here, which is actually crazy because I didn't realize it until just now. Usually lists like this play one Giralf's Messenger, which is essentially triple black, undying creature, comes into play, target opponent loses 2 life. So that's another way that you can win, but definitely eschewing the Giralf's Messenger and going in like with Blood Artist and Hapatra as like the win conditions of the deck. I don't hate it because you get to play cards like Prosperous Innkeeper, which is a way that you can go infinite as well. You don't gain any life, you don't net any life from this, but you do get to essentially draw until you reach like your Quarter Calling or your Eldritch Evolution if you have mana, to then go get your Blood Artist or Hapatra or anything like that to try to win the game. Uh, for Grist the Hunger Tide, Grist is awesome in this deck. It's only Planeswalker that doesn't get hit by Spell Pierce, which is really good, and Force of Negation as well, which you see more primarily from like Rhino's decks. I don't even think really Blue Eye Control plays Force of Negation anymore, but you have Grist that doesn't get hit by Spell Pierce and Force of Negation. Comes down and immediately puts your opponent on the clock. Just getting to make a 1/1 and like mill card feeds into its ultimate ability, which you can -5 for each opponent to lose life equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. And with you having a sack outlet, you are able to like just kind of put all these creatures on the board, get rid of all these creatures, and then like draw cards from that, and then play more creatures to put more creature cards in your graveyard to eventually just win with a Grist ultimate. It does come up some amount of the time and probably more often than you would expect. It also just can sack a creature to destroy a creature, and you can gain some tempo by like sacking a Stringergeist, killing a creature, and then being able to get in for 3 or more points of damage if you have Ignoble Hierarchs in play. Just a very versatile card. Also can be searched up with Quarter Calling or Eldritch Evolution, and it's just really interesting. Your opponent, uh, and a lot of times like cannot beat a Grist. It's very hard for other decks to beat Grist the Hunger Tide, and the fact that like it eats like a spell or two means that Yawgmoth more than likely gets to stick around and can just assemble these undying creatures to win the game. Uh, so I alluded to something. There's essentially two possibilities with this deck, and like two things that you're trying to accomplish. So we obviously found like the win condition for the combo, or for our combo, and that's identifying that like Blood Artist is a way that we can win the game. Hapatra, we can make a bunch of snakes, and then with the Prosperous Innkeeper, we can draw a bunch of cards. So to essentially make sure that we can draw as many cards as we need, because more than likely when you're going to tap out for a Yawgmoth. If you're going to cast a Yawgmoth and instead of searching for like Quarter Calling and stuff like that, or even Eldritch Evolutioning for it, you're going to be looking for a Court of Calling, which means that we want to draw as many cards as possible with this deck to give us the best chance of drawing a Court of Calling. So you'll see like in the mana base, there's 2 Blooming Marsh, there's 2 Boseiju, just to deal with like problematic permanents and stuff. 2 Forest, you have 2 Peatland, 2 Overgrown Tomb, a Swamp, 2 Twilight Mire, Verdant Catacombs, a Windswept Heath, a Wooded Foothills, and you have my Cradle of Growth. There's really, I mean, aside from like the Peatland, the Overgrown Tomb, like you have 6 fetch lands, and the rest of your lands do not deal damage to you. And like realistically, a lot of the time you are fetching up, basic lands with these fetch lands. There is also like you could probably get rid of like a Windswept Heath or a Wooded Foothills and play like a. I usually play an Urborg, which is essentially Yawgmoth Cradle of Growth, but makes everything swamps, so that you can still fetch up like basic forests with this deck, and then also have black mana for Yawgmoth, double black for like Yawgmoth and stuff like that. But with this deck being primarily more green, you can get away with just playing like a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth and playing another green fetch land. Surprisingly, I would think that you'd want to play like another black fetch land, maybe like split it between like black and green, but then again, green is the most important color, so is what it is. Looking at the sideboard, Fatal Pushes, Haywire Might, Thoughtseize, Veil of Summer, Go for the Throat, Scavenging Ooze, Endurance, Force of Vigor, Shieldred, which I'd seen is becoming increasingly popular for the sideboard of Yawgmoth. Just we see it in like kind of in Pioneer and Standard, like this card just sits on the battlefield and just wins the game. In Crime and Punishment as well. So kind of knowing what I know from like the Apex gaming and like the series and everything, and looking at the sideboard, I do kind of like how the sideboard is set up. You kind of see like what you see from like the modern metagame, like the top decks. Like you do see a decent amount of Murktide players. You see a good amount of like Hammer players. You see the Rhinos. You see like these 4-color Elemental decks. You'll kind of get like these weird one-off decks where like you'll kind of see like Living End will show up. You'll see like Jund, stuff like that. And I think a lot of these cards just have a lot of utility, going against those decks. I mean, like you have the Haywire Mites. You have Force of Vigor, and even like these Crime and Punishments and stuff like that. They're all versatile cards that just kind of deal with a lot of like the format. And obviously in Modern, a lot of the times you're choosing like what decks that you want to lose to by saying like, okay, I really need help in a certain matchup, so I'm going to take a card like this out, and it makes me worse against this matchup, but it makes this other matchup better that I think I'm more likely to see. So but this sideboard, looks great. Shieldred, definitely a card that I see popping up as like a one of in the sideboard of more Yawgmoth decks, and even some other decks that are just playing Eldritch Evolution to get it out super early. You have like these endurances, you have play 2 in the main, like you got these 2 in the sideboard. Really mess with like the Murktide deck, and then just like a 3/4 flyer or a 3/4 with reach. Definitely handles a decent amount of the threats from the Murktide deck and holds it down for a while against like a Ledger Shredder and things like that. Scavenging Ooze gets out of hand. Go for the Throat is an interesting option, but I'm assuming just like as like a hard answer to something. I mean, like obviously destroy target non-artifact creature. Uh, Pretty good. Ended up being pretty good in like the finals. Where played against Grixis Shadow, which I hope to go over in a future video. So yeah, that is the Golgari Yawgmoth deck. Overall, I love this deck. Obviously, it's the deck that I choose to play in Modern, in Paper Modern. It's obviously not the best deck in the format, because if it was, it'd be getting played a lot, like Murktide, Hammer, so on and so forth. But, this deck is definitely set up and has the tools to beat the Ragavan decks, but then also beat the other decks that are trying to beat Ragavan. And like you kind of just have like an in general, I think, a good matchup against a lot of decks, because interacting with your creatures is hard, because like your 4 important creatures essentially eat 2 removal spells to permanently get rid of. And if you have a Yawgmoth in play, then it makes interacting even harder with those cards, and you just kind of have to hope. Like if your opponent has no idea what's going on, you are severely ahead of them. And even if they do know what's going on, like there's ways to like play around certain scenarios and essentially just make it impossible for your opponent to try to win the game. So overall, love the deck. If you want to play it, go ahead and play it. I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. It definitely is a feel smart deck that is also like very, very good in the format. So definitely something worth trying. But yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. Of course, if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and getting to see more videos like this. Ring the notification bell so you know when those videos go live. And of course, going into the description and following me on Twitch and also joining the Discord server down there as well. So thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next video.